This is BBC2. In 10 minutes we're going racing at Cheltenham, but there's time now to offer a little bonus, a jaunt with the exuberant Lucinda Lambton from her Alphabet of Britain. And A is for Nouveau.
Whiplash forms, which became known as Art Nouveau, ride their way through the buildings of Europe during the late 18 and early 1900s, most outlandishly in Belgium and France and Spain, but seldom in the British Isles. They did occasionally snake their way into our buildings, though. Going along a sober street in Liverpool, you suddenly come upon them, twirling through the gates of the Philharmonic dining rooms. Just look at all these sweeps and swirls. Such wild abandon was thought by many in this country to be too decadent, a debased form of the pure arts and crafts movement that had been raging in the British Isles for years. And it is rare indeed to find this particular flamboyance, but what a joy! These glories were designed by H. Blomfield Barr. One of the most lavish examples of Art Nouveau in the country is to be found over 200 miles away in the south of England. The Watts Chapel at Compton near Guildford in Surrey was designed, built and decorated by a woman of 46 who had never built anything before in her life and was never to do so again. She was Mary Watts, the wife of the great Victorian painter George Frederick Watts. It took 3 years to build this gleaming brick beacon, which Mrs. Watts had always hoped would blend into the countryside. It does not, and it never will, and it is all the more glorious because of it. In you go, to be enfolded by the glow of rich, dark colours, and the opulent whirls and swirls with the weaving patterns. The roots of the tree of life writhe beneath the somberly beautiful winged messengers, the great feathered giantesses presenting the light and the dark side of things. Those of the light with their haunting faces gazing out, those of the dark with their backs to you. They stand 2 by 2 around the walls, all grasping a sharply raised cord with such symbolic medallions as meditation and balance. In deep relief, it is all made of gesso, fibre soaked in plaster of Paris, which Mary Watts fashioned into great panels at Limmersleigh, their house nearby, which was built with the terrible error of forgetting the staircase from the first to the second floor. A really strange detail is that George Frederick Watts, despite living only half a mile away from here with his wife, saw her great tour de force only once, and then it was by pure chance when he had followed her out for a walk. She wrote he had not before realized what I had aspired to in the matter of this glorified wallpaper, but that he showed generous appreciation. Watts is most picturesquely represented on one of the finest of all monuments, the splendidly sinuous memorial by Alfred Gilbert to the Duke of Clarence in the Albert Memorial Chapel in Windsor. Dressed up as Edward the Confessor, Watts was Gilbert's hero. He stands with a model of the chapel in his hands and is one of the richly formed guardians on the grillage of twin angels. The saintly guardians stand elegantly over all.
St. George with his ivory face and hands and his crustacean-like aluminium armour, with all its languorous lines and its languorous stance, most elegantly illustrating the shapely grace of Art Nouveau. The bronze Virgin is entwined with the thorny stems and blooms of a wild rose bush. Alfred Gilbert was one of the very few Englishmen who wove the swirls of the so-called Art Nouveau style into his designs.
In harrods surrounding the carcasses of meat, there are all the creatures that are to be eaten, with those who hunt them and those who tend them, all racing round in brilliant ceramic life and embraced by writhing Art Nouveau forms. It is curious indeed that these forms were not popular in the British Isles. They have such movement and such a life of their own. And let us shout acclaim for their artist, W.J. Neatby. He designed these tiles in 1902, in the astonishingly short time of only 9 weeks. And what about his triumph in the West Country? There are few buildings that give the shock of surprise that you get when, having walked under the ancient St. John's Gateway of Bristol, you come upon the screeching facade of Edward Everard's. It was built in 1900 as a printing house and is emblazoned with the glories of the craft. Everard wrote that this was a trophy to the Middle Ages, when the atmosphere was warm with the homeliness of pure and thoughtful craft. Gutenberg, the father of printing, is working away at his press, surrounded by his alphabet of the 1490s, and facing William Morris, who revived the craft, surrounded by his alphabet of the 1890s. The spirit of literature touches both the presses with the tips of her wings, and the literary symbols of truth and of light guard over all.
Such a degree of unusual interest was shown, indeed, that when the building was unveiled, the police had to control the thousands who came to marvel at its oddity. Bristol was bristling with beauty.
A swirling green copper mass of waves and water, babies and fish, churn about the base of the memorial to the great philanthropist Anthony Ashley Cooper, the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, who amongst his other triumphs prevented little children from working down the pit, where they were chained and manacled to carts which they had to haul along on all fours, often as young as 5 years old. It is the glorious, bulging and sinuous work of our old friend and hero, Alfred Gilbert, who always thought of it as his evil genius because it was greeted with hoots of derision. It was described by some as a dripping, sickening mess, and it was thought to be quite unsuitable a memorial to the great Earl, with Cupid firing his arrows at the parading prostitutes of this notoriously unsuitable district. The monument heralded Gilbert's financial downfall, in that it cost him twice as much as he was paid for it. And years later, when deep in the quagmire of poverty, debt, and unfinished commissions, his friends were appealing for help. And one very unwisely wrote to George Bernard Shaw, "A dishonoured sculptor should be shot," was the pleasant reply. But for Gilbert, shooting is too honourable a death. He should be drowned in the fountain with which he has disfigured Piccadilly. There were those, on the other hand, who suggested that Piccadilly Circus should be destroyed and rebuilt merely as a setting for Gilbert's jewel.
New Year's Day on BBC2. Radio Days starring Mia Farrow.